I've just run 15 kilometres and I feel great. This is a personal best for me and a milestone in the journey towards my 2022 goal of completing a 20 kilometre run in preparation for an eventual half marathon. It's a fantastic feeling hitting these milestones, and each time you do, it's a powerful reminder of the virtually boundless potential each of us holds and the amazing things we can achieve when we're properly orientated. This is my standard Sunday morning these days. A cup of tea and then an hour of stretching and mobility exercises before my long run for the week. But it was not always so. 3 years ago, my average Sunday morning looked very different. After demolishing a litre of gin or more the night before, I would most often emerge from a dank and dehydrated doze and lapse immediately into an unassailable state of anxiety. So bad were my hangovers that within minutes of waking, I would be shuffling to the kitchen for my medicine. No, I'm not talking about paracetamol or even Valium. I'm talking about the gin bottle. Armed with a hefty gin, tonic and soda water, I would creep back to bed, and there I would stay until the hangover was gone, only moving to visit the bathroom and to top up my own drink if my girlfriend was not feeling kindly disposed enough to do it for me, which in those days was a common occurrence on Sunday morning. It was not unusual for me to put away almost half a bottle of gin before getting up and getting dressed and getting on with the day. Such was the magnitude of my drinking problem. And it should also be noted that getting on with the day, in this context, usually meant visiting a local bar for a fatty, carb-heavy lunch and several glasses of wine before returning to the pad via the liquor store to resume the gin ritual, which as often as not would degenerate into a venomous shouting match with my girlfriend, so bad on a few occasions that the neighbours called the cops. So sitting here now, sober, energised from the longest run I've ever done, and working on one of my other 2022 goals, the establishment of this podcast, it feels immensely gratifying. Just the simple comparison of then and now is astounding. I might as well be a different person. I suppose I am a different person, and I would challenge anyone to tell me that I'm not a better person now than I was then, while keeping a straight face. And yet, there are those who preferred me as an overweight, angry alcoholic. Thankfully, I'm not talking about most people, and this gives me hope for humanity. Nor am I talking about my close friends and family for the most part. But it is clear from the aggregate sentiment that I'm able to glean through social media that many of the associates and acquaintances in my periphery had more time for me when the sum total of my contribution to humanity was an endless slew of self-aggrandizing posts detailing my lavish sartorial tastes and gastronomical proclivities, and of course my exaggerated penchant for dry martinis. What a dick. Hey everyone, look at me. I'm at a bar drinking a chilled glass of gin and vermouth, wearing a $2,000 cashmere coat and a matching Burberry scarf. Obviously a class act, right? But don't worry, I'm only posting it on Instagram to be ironic. Of course, I'm sure plenty of the same people were really just as unenamoured with me back then as they are now. But the fact remains that this kind of carry-on gets much more approval than the type of thoughtful socio-political commentary I share around these days. But it's not just a feeling I get from reading between the lines. I know from first-hand sources that comments have been made by erstwhile associates of mine in the past couple of years about my apparent descent into far-right lunacy. And I can only imagine what other conversations, unheard by anyone loyal enough to pass them on to me, may have transpired. I imagine they go something like this. Geez, what happened to that guy? He used to be such a regular fellow, one of us. Now he's off down that far-right rabbit hole. Some of the stuff he's saying is pretty extreme. I'm not sure there's much hope for him at this point. What a shame. To be fair though, I have said some pretty extreme things. I've criticised large multinational corporations for malfeasance and corruption. I've condemned government policy which needlessly destroyed people's lives. I've pointed out that burning down black-owned businesses is a bad look for an organisation called Black Lives Matter. Things like that. so I totally understand why people might be disturbed or offended by my wacky ideas. But the fact remains that said ideas are now coming from a guy who runs 15 kilometres on a Sunday and spends the rest of the day writing, instead of drinking off his hangover and justifying his directionless existence with overpriced brunches and cocktails to furnish his Instagram feed with yet another scintillating update. And while I'm aware that many within my extended network may be oblivious to my personal transformation, and only aware that I've suddenly become politically outspoken, I can't get away from the irony that, regardless, they liked me better as an angry alcoholic. It says a lot about herd mentality, or what this recent meme terms the Mr. Smith effect. Despite its crudity and its mislabeling of Agent Smith as Mr. Smith, it is a useful way of examining the phenomenon, for it explains why one may completely disregard any evidence that a person has improved themselves, and declare rather that they have changed for the worse. Because as I have previously discussed in my video, I Support the Current Thing, linked in the description, to these types of people, the crucial metric for acceptability is compliance with the machine. One can be a violent alcoholic cokehead and be a more desirable addition to the dinner party simply because he repeats the correct talking points. Speaking for myself, I know with an unshakable certainty that I'm better now than I was before. Not only am I fitter, skinnier, happier, and in much better general health, but I'm clear-headed and able to properly formulate arguments in complex trains of logic. And perhaps most strikingly, my productivity has absolutely skyrocketed. I may miss the mark on many things, but I'm engaged in a process of discovery, and I'm committed to it. I am 100% dedicated to making both myself and the world a better place in whatever small way I can manage every day. It's that simple. And it has been precisely through this process of asking questions, formulating hypotheses, and challenging accepted dogma, both within myself and outwardly, that I have managed to advance to this new, better mode of being. Yet my questions have rendered me problematic to some who formerly considered me a smart and reliable friend and colleague. My questions, to them, cannot be the byproduct of a personal awakening and a journey of growth and ascendance. They must be the result of nefarious indoctrination. I remember in 2020, when things were really hotting up and I had lost a handful of Facebook friends, presumably for the reasons discussed above. I made this meme to express my feelings about the situation. Basically, if you want to delete me because you disagree with my opinion, then thanks. I'm probably better off without you in my life. It was meant to be a light-hearted dig at anyone who was feeling triggered by my posts and considering hitting the jettison button. But what happened next was funny. A former colleague and one of the most vocal opponents of my new outlook popped up and said something like, "Unfortunately, that's what happens when you constantly share the type of inflammatory rhetoric that you've been putting out. People drift away until eventually you find yourself alone in a hermetically sealed far-right echo chamber." To this person, there was no possibility that I was on a good-faith journey of discovery and trying to figure out the vagaries of our hyper-polarised political climate. No. To him, I had to be heading down a rabbit hole of far-right extremism, and unable to detect the humour in my meme, as is typical of establishment-minded types, he thought he had me, and doled out his grave tut-tutting diagnosis with the pompous sanctimony I've come to know so well from the liberal mainstream. Needless to say, he was embarrassed and at pains to justify his remark when I told him that I had in fact lost only a grand total of 6 Facebook friends out of almost 600. As I said earlier, most people are at the very least quietly tolerant of my new format. Others are curious and sporadically engaged, and those closest to me, depending on their political and philosophical leanings, range from respectful to admiring. For the fact is that I am better now. Politics be damned. But there are those who like me better as an overweight, angry alcoholic, and I find this fascinating and disturbing. We must be wary of these people and learn to recognise them, not so we can marginalise or harm them in any way, but to protect ourselves and others from the control they would seek to exert over us through social pressure. These Agent Smith-like citizens sit there waiting for the people who speak against the matrix of control, the people who connect the dots, or the people who recognise the patterns in the slave code. And then... Thanks for listening. Please subscribe to my Substack at jjdawson.substack.com. And if you'd like to keep in touch, please do follow me on Twitter at RealJJDawson. You can also follow me on Getter, Gab and Minds. And of course, if you enjoyed this, please do give it a like and share it about, because it really helps me out.